Hello everyone, it's Bavar from PTC or Port Terra Conglomerate here. We're here with our latest video to give you an overview of one of the most popular, or at least one of the most well-beloved ships of the verse. The ship whose critics and its fans won't shut up about, the CNOU Nomad. Throughout this video we'll be covering the ship's lore, her overall features and specifications, special features of the ship, its layout, flight profile, recommended tactics, and how PTC likes to use the ship. We will also cover a real-world equivalent that we feel is similar to how PTC likes to use the Nomad. In 2942, 2 years before the Mustang's launch, CNOU was essentially a non-entity, at least as far as the broader aerospace industry was concerned. The company was largely known as a minor astro-engineering firm headed by the wealthy Bremener Silas Kerner. Being a fully private entity, the company stayed largely hidden and under the radar, with its status allowing it to keep its goals and resources hidden. With that being said, for context, Consolidated's R&D teams were working on a variety of projects simultaneously, in addition to the Mustang. These were aimed from the get-go at disrupting existing industries. Consolidated Outlands' intended follow-up to the Mustang series was the Manta. The acronym stands for Multi-Crew Accessible New Transport A, which was designed under the guidance of Dr. Charlotte Rowland, the former chief engineer for Kernes's fish farming operations. By 2944, the Manta started to take shape as a roughly Constellation-sized craft, aimed at being so cheap it'd make even Drake blush. Their main methods of accomplishing this unenviable task was to use as many off-the-shelf components as possible, being in the vicinity of around 95%, with only a small internal cabin actually requiring bespoke construction. Taking this approach would have allowed Consolidated Outlands to assemble the majority of the ship over having to actually invest in mass ship fabrication facilities. Thanks to their efforts, they managed to build a Constellation-sized multi-crew craft that only cost roughly 20% of a contemporary Constellation at about 750,000 UEC. One key factor that helped to keep the price low was the usage of a exposed cargo space similar to industrial haulers at the time. Sadly, the Manta was without a plan to get the ship to market and was subsequently sidelined by Kerner's pivot to focus on a Mustang-scale follow-up, largely due to the ship's rampant success. This explosion onto the broader aerospace scene was facilitated, at least in part, by a galactic gear segment profile on the CEO and the new ship. By and large, most of the funds brought in by the Mustang sales went to Project Ranger, which would go on to become the Pioneer. Some, however, were diverted to at least what was, for now, the Manta project. It didn't take long though for the new direction of the Manta project to become known, much to the consternation of Rowland. One early fight between Kerner and Rowland, with the former's increasing participation in the project, was over the project's name, with it eventually transitioning to Project Nomad. This was done in order to associate the image of the new ship with that of the Mustang, allowing owners to strike out on their own in the frontier. The now Project Nomad was scaled down to a single-seat transporter capable of moving a surprisingly large amount of cargo for a single-seater. Most of the original team was eventually retasked to work on Project Ranger, with Rowland herself resigning rather than accepting a transfer to Consolidated Outlands Industrial Division. Surprising no one, the drastic shift in focus led to significant delays as the design was reworked to now act as a low-cost competitor to more expensive ships in the same class. As the design was finalized, it ended up being far more of a bespoke design, with the only influence from the Manta being the external cargo pad, or hold. With the ship requiring far more custom manufacturing and bespoke components than before, the cost ballooned to around twice of what was originally intended for the multi-crew Manta at around $1 million and some change. The most difficult portion of the ship's construction was the hovering landing gear. which was required to be more advanced than past iterations of the technology due to its role in reducing the cost of the hull. Like with many things, time and credits solved the remaining issues though. However, it did take long enough for the broader industry to start wondering where the hell the Mustang II was. The Nomad was revealed to the verse at the 2950 IAE. A notable surprise was the same-day launch at ship dealers in 11 systems, with Consolidated having shipped thousands of Nomads around the UAE for test flights. To quote Silas Kerner, "When we introduced the Mustang line back in 2944, our aim was to reshape the dream of spaceflight. Since then, much has changed in the way we traverse the stars. The universe itself has expanded, with infinite opportunities waiting out there for all of us brave enough to chase them. The time has come to reshape the dream yet again, to push further than we ever have before. The time has come for the Nomad." Silas Kerner, 2950. It would seem the public weren't the only ones surprised at the Nomad's launch, with the customers being very different from what had been initially expected. Instead of customers looking to pair their Mustangs with Nomads, it was instead being bought to outfit corporate fleets or as an introductory spacecraft in and of its own. Additionally, surprising everyone, paramilitary forces were picking them up by the dozen due to their internal missile bays and the ship's ability to rapidly ferry cargo and small arms about as needed. The media of the time, naturally seeking to capitalize on this as any scandal's a scandal, tried to frame Consolidated Outland as deliberately courting this market segment, though this narrative fell to pieces when it became somewhat obvious that the large and solid silhouette and exposed cargo bay denied the Nomad any real dogfighting or combat credentials. Since the ship's release, she has attracted a steady base of pilots who swear by the craft and its ability to ferry cargo and small vehicles. Seeking to take advantage of this, Consolidated Outlands went on to develop and subsequently release the Hoverquad, a small hoverbike built to perfectly fit, more or less, into the Nomad's cargo area, which went on to see success in its own right. The community of Nomad owners or pilots also became known for a multitude of unusual stunts. These included transporting unexpected vehicles or living in Nomad challenges, to name two. The record for the latter is 6 weeks as of recording, and as for the former, it's not unusual to see the odd Nomad pilot ferrying a P-52 or P-72 around in the back somewhat haphazardly. As a final lore note, Roland, the original director of the Manta program, ended up adopting the Nomad as the primary craft for her hauling concern, focused on low-cost or budget hauling as well as renting out the Nomads. Her business and the craft were so successful she ended up purchasing 2 full production runs of 96 Nomads apiece, and within the year fielding them as unliveried rentals throughout the empire. In terms of the ship's specification and features, she has a length of 27.0 meters, a beam of 19.0 meters, and a height of 10. In terms of her components, she's running size 1s across the board, with a single size 1 radar, 2 size 1 computers, a single size 1 power plant, 2 size 1 coolers, and in an unusual configuration, 3 size 1 shields. In terms of her weapons loadout, you'll see her fielding 3 gimbaled laser repeaters, at least as a default, being size 2, and as for her ordnance, she carries 8 size 2 missiles, being the Strike Force 2s as a default. She has a larger than standard small craft QT fuel amount at about 770 litres, with the standard assortment of countermeasures. In terms of her special features, she features 24 SCU of exterior cargo space at the rear of a ship in the exposed cargo bay, which is also capable of carrying ground vehicles up to a rock in size. In terms of her internal facilities or features, she has surprisingly decent living quarters with a bed, small kitchenette, bathroom, gun racks. The Nomad does have her ace in the hole, as it were, at least her novelty feature, being the hovering landing gear, which does allow you to land in somewhat rougher terrain than traditional flat landing gear. She also does feature a size 1 tractor beam on the utility mount, obviously in the cargo bay area. And I will say she does have fantastic cockpit visibility. In terms of her layout, we enter into a foyer-like area with some storage components and visibility into the cargo area. Leaving this room, we then move into the crew accommodation area and subsequently into the cockpit. In terms of her flight performance, the Nomad was designed and built as a freighter. You wouldn't think that behind that stick, however, was a relatively nimble ship. Whilst no car too well, she's certainly no starfarer. Her acceleration is surprisingly nippy with a decent top speed of 1171 and an SEM of about 180. Her overall agility is nothing to be sneezed at, though she does lose speed very quickly if maneuvering at high speed, especially within atmosphere. Attempting to do so in space will lead to a significant drift. The Nomad's boost, whilst smaller in quantity, is relatively punchy, with the ship having decent roll but weaker pitch and yaw. In terms of her recommended tactics, whilst able to defend herself to a degree, the Nomad's main strength is avoiding a fight in the first place, by flying smart and flying in secured space. Hog fighting, to quote Ray's guide, is another recommended approach, i.e. flying as evasively as possible with an aim to escape being your absolute priority. Failing that, put on a good smile and hope you're good at negotiating. As for her claim times, you'll find her standard is 42 seconds as of current patch, expedited being instant, and the cost being a eye-watering 340 UEC. In terms of her use cases and equivalents, PTC often employs the Nomad as a light freighter, a rock carrier, or a bunker runner, often with a crate in the back for the obvious loot. As for her equal, we decided to go with the Bell UH-1Y Venom, a modernised variant of the Huey, our reasons being more or less similar handling characteristics as more utility-focused vehicles in their own rights, and well, both are utility vehicles with small-scale cargo carrying capability and limited combat capability attributed to them. In conclusion, it's rare that you find such a useful little ship, especially one that has such polarizing opinions about it, at least internally at PTC. Two notable comments from PTC members were, a ship that's not to be underestimated for the starter or experienced player. Its versatility and unique aesthetics offer us the opportunity to experience Star Citizen and nearly all of its current gameplay loops. With another saying, the Nomad grows on you, like a tumour. As for my own take on the old girl, she's quite the nifty little ship, a handy bird for anyone to have, especially thanks to her utility. And I will say she is damned useful as part of a salvaging operation, especially when you're recovering cargo or munitions from wrecks or weapons due to the ease of loading and unloading with her exposed cargo bed. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, a comment, or even subscribe if you're wanting to see more of this. All that being said, what's the weirdest thing you've carried in a Nomad, or your favourite story involving one? Bavar from PTC, signing off.